Good morning. Welcome to our special meeting of Municipal Council for Tuesday, December 13th, 2022. I'd like to call this meeting to order at this time and ask if there's any declarations of interest. Seeing none, I will move to our land acknowledgement. The town of East Gwillimbury recognizes and acknowledges the lands originally used and occupied by the first peoples of the Williams Treaty, First Nations, and other Indigenous peoples. And on behalf of Council, I thank them for sharing this land. We also acknowledge the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation as East Gwillimbury's closest First Nation community and recognize the unique relationship the Chippewas have with the lands and the waters of this territory. They are the water protectors and environmental stewards of these lands, and we join them in this responsibility. We are at item D in our council agenda with deputations. At this time, we have no deputations. We are going to go into a workshop, and I would call on our CAO, Mr. Webster, at this time.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and good morning to yourself and members of council. We continue in a hybrid mode. We do have several staff members today of our senior team that are not feeling quite well, and so they're wisely working remote, and we encourage that as we move forward. This is a special council session. We have another one planned for next Tuesday as well, and the topic is a very important one. It's the development and approval of a council strategic plan to guide this four-year term of council. It's a very important blueprint for us to guide our programs, services, and community outcomes for this term, and we use it as a basis. It'll be used as a basis for our annual business plan and budgets, for our employee development plans, for which will also include performance appraisals, and for our corporate priorities and outcomes. So very important document. We did have a three-day orientation session for council in late November. We touched on this topic just briefly, and so it's important now as we move into public session that we have a full dialogue, and we look forward to the discussion of council on this document. Just to introduce the team for those. It's led, the facilitation will be led. We are not using external consultants, so we're fortunate we have a great skill set in the organization. Margot Bajin is our acting director of development services, and she will be leading the facilitation. And she's being capably assisted by Frank Mazzata, who's a manager in our Parks and Recreation area, Christy Beatty, who's a manager in our water and wastewater area, and Andras Saunier, who is our chief building official. So those are the folks that are going to guide the facilitated session. Margot advises me we have a 3-hour slot, and she thinks we'll be using up a good chunk of it today. So look forward to the discussions, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Mayor, and welcome members of council. If we could go to the next slide, please. So it's my pleasure today to facilitate this session, and I hope that it will be an interactive one and that there'll be opportunity for lots of dialogue as we support your efforts to build the strategic plan for this term of council. The CAO has given you an introduction to the team. You've met us through the individual interviews that were conducted. But for any members of the public joining, I just wanted to sort of do a review of what's happened so far in this process. We start every strategic planning exercise with a literature review or a review of existing documents. So that entailed some of the existing master plans and the official plan, all of the things that provide sort of overarching context for the work that we're about to undertake today. We provided an introduction to the strategic planning process as part of council orientation, and then over the last couple of weeks we conducted individual interviews with members of council to try to drill down a little bit more on what worked for the existing sort of the prior plan of council, what areas might need to be amplified, and was there anything missing. And then through that work we set about trying to identify some of the emerging themes, and that's sort of the context of the presentation that I'll share today, and hopefully reflects the input that you've provided individually, and now we can sort of discuss collectively. Next slide, please. The objectives for this exercise, if you think of it in terms of building this plan as its own project, is obviously to engage yourselves, staff members, members of key stakeholders and partners, and members of the public. We want to validate the key themes, that being what's important to council, what matters, what do we need to be paying attention to, confirm our strategic objectives, what are the things we are going to tackle for this term of council, and then take some time to sort of validate our vision for the future of East Gwillimbury and our core purpose. We use the term core purpose somewhat interchangeably with the idea of a mission, but our core purpose answers sort of why are we here and what are we meant to do to serve this municipality. And then through that process, we'll assign priorities. And then staff will be able to provide or to suggest some key performance indicators so that the outputs, the actions that staff are taking, the outputs that they're generating are supporting the high-level outcomes that council would like to see. We'll then prepare a draft strategy for your review, and we'll validate that strategy with input from key stakeholders and the public, and then finally adopt the updated strategy. I did want to note that we're not starting from scratch. This is an update to an existing strategy that has existed through prior terms of council, and it's really more about being able to look at what's happening in the community, what sort of we have emerging legislation changes that have been brought about by growth, and sort of a refresh and looking to see what makes sense and what might we need to adjust, or what might we need to prioritize this term of council that might be different. That's not to suggest that we can't add new things, that we don't necessarily have to stick to the existing script, but it's my understanding and the understanding of the team that council by and large is fairly happy with the overall themes that existed in the prior strategy. So this is looked at more as a refresher and update. Next slide, please. So the strategic priorities of the prior strategy were responsible growth and environmental protection, quality programs and services, building complete communities, and achieving a culture of municipal excellence. So we took that as our starting point, and then we asked, what has anything changed, and have any new priorities emerged? Next slide, please. For today, for this session, this workshop, we're hoping to be able to define the key concepts that have emerged through our discussion. The presentation that was shared with you earlier identifies hopefully a distillation of the input that you've provided, but we can, part of the exercise will be to refine that and ensure that it accurately reflects your priorities. And then we had a lot of discussion individually about strategic lenses and overarching themes, things that were really important and things that need to impact everything that we do as a municipality. We'll then validate those strategic priorities, identify any new ones, and then hopefully finish off today's session by validating the vision and the core purpose. Next slide, please. So just to provide a little bit of context, this strategic plan essentially functions as a business plan for this term of council. In our individual discussions, a number of members of council highlighted that a strategic plan typically has a much longer planning horizon, and we look to documents that I mentioned, such as the OP and long-term master plans, to provide that long-range planning. In that sense, this strategic plan functions more as a business plan that aligns with these higher objectives but guides this a discrete period of time, the 4 years of this term of council. At a future workshop, we'll have an opportunity to validate all of the priority actions that staff have identified and tactics, and in this context, ensure that our daily operations support the higher level plan. I think it's also important to note that, as I mentioned, we're not starting from scratch. A lot of efforts toward achieving these strategic priorities are already underway and continuing. And there are obviously things that as a municipality we are legislated to do, that we legally, actions and tactics and tasks that we have to perform. So those continue regardless of any new priorities that we may introduce as part of this planning process. Next slide, please. We had some discussions about one of the theme of sustainability. And there were some questions about sustainability, maybe perhaps not being a strong enough word. And so I wanted to take an opportunity to get some feedback from members of council on trying to find a definition that works for East Gwillimbury. We look, the common definition is that sustainability is comprised of 3 pillars: economic, environmental, and social. And we had some discussions about how those align with some of our other strategic priorities, but it's about more than just mitigating negative impacts, or the feedback that we got in the individual interviews was that our efforts should seek to improve or enhance. The idea that future generations will benefit from an improved quality of life or improved environmental conditions. So I just wanted to take a moment to check in with members of council and invite any feedback. Does this resonate? Is this accurate? Are we comfortable with this definition of sustainability, and does this work?
Councillor Crothers, go ahead, please.
I think it depends on where we're using it. So, yes, it's a good definition. If we have it as one of our strategic pillars on its own, I think it's out of context. So I do like the definition, but I'd like to know where we're going to use it and how it would be used.
Okay, through you, Madam Mayor. I think the idea is that it's sort of the overarching theme that we aspire to. If all of the priorities that we identify should support in some fashion economic sustainability, social sustainability, and environmental sustainability. That's what makes us a sustainable community. So if we think of it in those terms, and then out of that, specific actions and tactics will fall out of that. But I think it gives it anchors those objectives in a common thread, and that there is, as we'll discuss in a later slide, the concept of balance, and that if you were to focus only on economic sustainability at the expense of the environment, that wouldn't work. Conversely, if all of your efforts focused on the environment, but people didn't have jobs or couldn't afford to live, that wouldn't work. So it's about achieving a sense of balance, and I think so from that context, it's sort of a high-level theme that supports the themes that fall out of it.
So I've scrolled ahead, and I see that we're going to be discussing it in the vision, and I think that's where I'll have more comments on it, because on one hand, it's a good word, but it sets the bar too low for me. For me, I would like it to be the whole enhanced and improved sustainability can be seen as maintaining the status quo. So we'll talk about it more when we get to vision, but I do like how you've woven economic growth, environmental, and social well-being into that. So I do like that. And I think that if we're going to use it in the vision, we need this definition in the document as well.
I think that's consistent with feedback that we had from a number of members of council, that it needs to, we need to be very intentional about how we define it for East Gwillimbury, and that it needs to be more than maintaining status quo, that it be aspirational, and it be more about, if we're speaking about the environment, perhaps like the idea of leaving it better than we found it, that type of thing. Next slide, please. Resilience is something I wanted to address. It didn't specifically get touched on in our conversations, but I think it does. It is sort of a natural. It naturally relates to the idea of sustainability. I think we talk a lot in terms of climate change and climate change mitigation about resilience and the ability to withstand disaster, but I think that there are social definitions of resiliency as well, and the ability to be, to support community well-being and cohesiveness, and strengthen communities to withstand changes. We saw that through the pandemic, and continue to see the impacts of how important resiliency is. So any thoughts from members of council on where that fits in terms of our objectives and priorities?
Councillor LaHaye.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. I read the paragraph that was written to support resilience, and that resilience is critical to successful outcomes. But with the phrase foster community recovery, the word recovery, I was questioning about the inclusion of that word. Are you referring to the pandemic, or what recovery are we referring to?
Through you, Madam Mayor, typically resiliency in a municipal context is focusing on disaster recovery or economic downturn, something negative that impacts the community. And so resiliency often talks about a community's ability to weather those storms and be able to bounce back. So in that sense, it's about being able to recover, having a diversified enough economy that if you have a downturn in one sector, that it doesn't impact the entire economy, having a social network so that if things like the pandemic happen, you have ability to be able to support people. So but I was hoping, just to consider expanding it beyond just the idea of responding to a disaster or to some negative event, but just fostering the ability to be resilient socially in terms of, and I think we already, this is not a new concept. We are already doing a lot of effort, and there's a lot of effort in terms of programming and initiatives that support resiliency. We just haven't necessarily named it, and so just wanted to introduce it as a concept for discussion. Okay, next slide, please. So this goes into a little bit more detail on that strategic lens of the idea of sustainability, having the three components, the environmental component in terms of, being able to reflect on when we're undertaking a new initiative or a project, being able to look at it and say, how does this support our overarching goals around climate change mitigation or environmental enhancement? Looking at it from a social perspective, there was a lot of discussions about the idea of connection and inclusion. So, I think our efforts with respect to diversity, equity, and inclusion relate to that sense of social sustainability. And we've also had conversations about placemaking, and that is another element of social sustainability. And then in terms of economic, there's sort of the internal lens in terms of how we operate as a municipality and our fiscal responsibility and how we plan and manage our resources. But then there's also sort of the outward facing economic sustainability for businesses and residents and their ability to participate and succeed in the economy, and having a sustainable balance between a residential and commercial tax base, for example. So those types of elements. And the idea, it was suggested through the discussions that being able to show them sort of interlinked, and that if it's a Venn diagram, the intersection is sort of that sustainability, the core sustainability for the municipality. So any thoughts? Does that work? Is that on track with what you were expecting? Okay.
I'm not seeing any comments.
Great. Excellent. Okay, then next slide, please. We've had some discussions around and obviously a core priority has been build complete communities. But one of the discussions we had focused on the idea that we may not all have the same perspective or the same definition of a complete community. So I borrowed this from the City of Ottawa. And I thought it was relevant because it relates to something that I think is achievable in East Gwillimbury with our specific geographic characteristics. It's the idea of 15-minute neighborhood where you can access daily and weekly needs. There's diverse land uses. There's opportunities for interaction and connection. There's a sense of placemaking, and I wanted to know that while typically the 15-minute neighborhood is sort of premised on the idea that you can access all of these resources by walking, it does not assume that everyone can or will want to walk everywhere all the time. Other modes of transportation need to be used, and to support specific personal factors, and there should be efforts to increase the opportunities for walking as a viable option for as many people as possible. That's sort of an important theme, that it's not at the exclusion of other modes of transport, especially as we are in a car-dependent community right now, but it's sort of that's the objective that we work towards. So it informs programming, it informs planning, it informs community design. So in an effort to try to get consensus around what we mean by complete community, what are your thoughts on the idea of this 15-minute neighborhood as an objective? And does it seem achievable for our town?
Councillor Roy DeClemente, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you, I believe that concept is already enshrined in our official plan, that idea of the 15-minute neighborhood. So it's there. It's already part of our discussion. I guess for me is I'm looking to understand how a 15-minute neighborhood would be sustainable and resilient. If we're going to be using those ideas, how are they linked, and what would that look like?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. Just to clarify, I believe, and this is partly the exercise to sort of get clarity, the 15-minute, in the reference to 15-minute access in the official plan is community-wide, which I would argue is probably not going to be achievable in the, short or immediate term. So this is more focused on, there were discussions about, sort of stranded neighborhoods where they're not connected, they don't have sidewalks. So it's centering efforts around building that connectivity, and I think that is how you achieve the sustainability and resiliency. If they have if neighborhoods have the elements of being able to access services that they, not every service that's not going to be achievable, not all of employment, but at least working toward that objective, and then opportunities to gather and to connect with each other. That's how you build resiliency. So being able to walk to a doctor's office, being able to walk to a grocery store, being able to walk to a library, all of those things foster that sense of connection to resources and support. So I think that the distinction between focusing on a neighborhood versus community-wide may be more achievable in our context and relevant to some of the work that's already been identified in terms of supporting some of what we call stranded communities or stranded neighborhoods. So.
Councillor Crone, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to Ms. Bejan. Thank you for this. I think certainly a 15-minute neighborhood is aspirational, and we should, anything we do, we should be stretching and challenging ourselves. I would contend, though, I think we have some communities where it'll be a challenge to deliver this, just by virtue of, circumstance. You look at Mount Albert, for instance. Our public transit is light. It's been constrained lately. So being car light or car free probably is not an option in that community. So and given that Mount Albert's in a sea of greenbelt, we're kind of constrained. Although lately the greenbelt seems to be a little more fluid than it has been with its boundaries. What I'd be curious is if we can't be a 15-minute, if a neighborhood, for instance, can't be a 15-minute neighborhood, what's the next best thing? So do we build a sort of a maybe it's a 20-minute neighborhood or whatever. I don't know. You're better at this than I, but I think we need to think of, okay, if we can't hit the top aspiration, what's the next best thing, and strive for that. Anyway, just a comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
It also depends on how fast you walk, too.
Through you, just for clarity, through you, Madam Mayor, I think the idea is that you would center around a commercial core such as the one in downtown Mount Albert and build out 15 minutes from that. That's sort of the challenge that we have because of where Mount Albert is and where Sharon is. That's not going to be a walkable, for most people, won't be a walkable, distance anytime soon. So, but within that, building that sort of connection to the commercial core, connection to each other, connection to resources within that sphere. So I think it just provides some context for programming, it provides context for urban planning, and I think that it's more manageable chunk, if you will, than the objective, which, to be completely as a municipality walkable. But and that certainly is in line with, planning best practices around neighborhood revitalization and neighborhood, resiliency, those types of things, so.
Councillor Carruthers, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I think this concept is so vital, and it's linked to sustainability, is that it's unsustainable to keep building stranded communities. It's unaffordable for residents who might move out with one car and quickly need 2 cars, and get teenagers need 3, 4 cars. It's just not affordable. And I liked your comments on Mount Albert. It's not about a 20-minute community. It's about bringing everything into that core that people need for their, I like how you said their daily and weekly needs, that yes, you still might have to go to Costco once a month or something like that, but on a daily basis, you can be car light, which means you have 1 car in the family rather than every person in the family needing a car. So again, I'm going to say that the concept is great, but how and where do we use it? We already have it in our official plan. It's been in our Thinking Green standards for, I guess, a decade now. It's number 20, complete communities, proximity to amenities, all new residential and non-residential lots and blocks are within approximately 800 meters walking distance of at least 3 amenities. So it's right in there, but we haven't done it, and it's under the column of the must-dos. So we can put this up and say this is something that we aspire to and put it in our strategic plan, but what are we going to do with it? So to me, it's taking this to the next level and saying, here's how that happens, and what things do we need to support to make sure that that happens? Because I think we've already agreed on this concept in our Thinking Green strategy. We just haven't operationalized it.
Councillor Foster, go ahead, please.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I wonder what are the possible negative aspects of what we're talking about here? And it came to mind when Councillor Crone mentioned Mount Albert. So let's say Mount Albert just grows big enough to be 2 15-minute communities, and we have 2 small grocery stores, and neither one of them can make it because they're drawing from a small group. Let's say the store's not big enough to get those people that come once a month or whatever. So are there some negative aspects here in this 15-minute community that we're missing or that we should be thinking about?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. I think that for something like that, typically would be market-driven. So one of the challenges is that in a community that is unlikely to grow beyond 10,000 residents, Mount Albert, for example, would you get 2 large chain grocery stores? It's unlikely that you would, because so you may not be able to achieve everything on the list, but I think that the intent is to operationalize it in a more meaningful way, and so that it informs our planning to the best of our ability. We've just conducted a commercial and retail gap analysis in Mount Albert, for example, so we have a good understanding of what is leaking out of the economy and what the market will support. So that's part of it. But the other potential consideration, negative perhaps, is that if you have a grocery store, you have truck traffic because the store has to be supplied. So there's a balance that needs to be achieved. If you want walkability, you can't do it without having goods being brought into your community. So that's part of the planning and part of the conversation that it needs to happen if this is an objective that we want to pursue. To the earlier point about how to have, to give it more teeth, I think it is enshrined in the official plan. the requirement for tertiary planning, the community design plans addresses this and, you know, ensuring that we actually, you know, we use that we leverage that as a planning tool. The allocation policy is in need of an update, so that may be another opportunity to be able to build in some of these priorities. And I'm sure my colleagues would have lots of other suggestions of how it could be operationalized.
Go ahead, please.
I think that we're looking at our existing communities and trying to think about how to make them into 15-minute communities, which is good and we should be doing. But I think almost more importantly is that we have to be building 15-minute communities. So when we're looking at new developments, when we're looking at new plans, we have to be looking at this 15-minute community. I think we should not spend our whole time focusing on what's already there, but thinking, but this is a concept that we should be putting into future planning.
Councillor Leahy.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. I agree very much with Councillor Carruthers' statements and about how it's easier when you're planning for future residences to create that 15-minute community rather than retroactively trying to go back in and add missing elements of the 15-minute community to unique communities like Mount Albert. But in order to achieve the how, which is what Councillor Carruthers is talking about, taking it to the next level, because you have had this concept in previous strategic plans, I think it might be useful to break down the unique communities within East Gwillimbury, because if we're talking about across all of East Gwillimbury, it might be easier to achieve a 15-minute neighborhood if you break it down into manageable areas, if that is a possible way of addressing it. So Holland Landing's needs might be different from Mount Albert's needs in order to create 15-minute neighborhoods. I'm thinking specifically in Ward 3 where there's no medical health center at all. And so if you want to achieve a 15-minute community within walking distance, and we have a lack of transit as well, then we do have to seriously put our money where our ideas are, and in terms of making these things happen with on the to-do list that you referred to, Councillor Carruthers. So I am all in favor of these positive aspirational 15-minute communities, but we do have to follow through then with actual investment in terms of meeting the needs of the residents in these unique communities.
We certainly do have unique communities. Is it a possibility at some point, and I know we've had this on our wish list for quite some time, could we start at 20 minutes? And or a little higher, but try to achieve that to start with, and then as we moved along, it may mean that we have people coming to our doors wanting to build a new facility of whatever, and we may be able to steer them into that direction as opposed to having 15-minute walks that we're not quite there. Just any other questions, comments? Councillor Roy DiClemente, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I'm not sure changing it from 15 minutes to 20 minutes is really a meaningful change, in that does it matter if it takes you 20 minutes to walk to the doctor's office or if it takes you 15? I don't think there's a distinction to be made. I think one of the challenges that we're struggling with is making sure that what we do going forward is set up to be a 15-minute community. So for example, the neighborhoods in Queensville, right now, they're basically a bedroom community. They don't have the services that would allow them to be complete or 15 minutes. But we know that in the fullness of time, it will be, because we've planned for it to happen that way. And I think that's what the important distinction is for us, is as we continue to develop and grow, are we positioned to make sure that in the fullness of time it is a 15-minute community. And then the harder part is retroactively trying to shoehorn in services where there are none. So Mount Albert would be a prime candidate for a 15-minute community, should they be able to attract the human services like the doctor's offices and that sort of thing, to be able to be a true 15-minute community. The grocery store is out by the highway, right? But could you bring it into town? What if there was a Vince's sort of thing in the middle of town? It's possible. It used to be like that. So, you know, how do we retroactively go back and fix some of the mistakes of the past? Thanks.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments? I'm not seeing any.
Thank you. Next slide, please. The next two slides are just sort of a variety of attributes or suggested attributes of that 15-minute neighborhood, a complete community. I won't read them all, but just I'll give you a minute to review, and if there's anything that doesn't resonate or anything that you suggest doesn't fit or something that's missing, please let me know.
Councillor LaHaye?
Through you, Madam Mayor, thank you. Safe and convenient access to transit. This is a component that I don't have any easy answers to or suggestions to, but is completely, I won't say completely, completely is an extreme word, but it is extremely lacking in Mount Albert and is a constant request, because our community is very senior oriented, that there is a lack of transit. So having safe and convenient access to transit, is it realistically a component that should stay in there for Mount Albert? Or do any other councillors have suggestions about the whole transit issue as part of the 15-minute neighborhoods?
I'm not seeing any comments at this time. Go ahead, please.
I go back to some of the discussion that we had during our orientation, where Ms. Ingram told us to stay in our lane. And transit's not within our purview. It's not anything that's part of, as a lower tier municipality, we're not tasked with delivering. We can advocate for it. We can push for it, but it's not something that we can actually deliver on at this point. I kind of, when I see safe and convenient, I don't feel that our access to transit is unsafe. I think it's very safe. It's just completely inconvenient. It's there. It's just completely inconvenient for anyone who wants to try and use it. I think that's the key. It's not that it's unsafe.
Councillor Crothers, go ahead, please.
Thank you. So I'm looking at this and looking at what is within our purview and what is not. To me, transit, well, we don't deliver the transit, we build the communities that are transit friendly or not. So when we build a Queen's Landing, Minto type subdivision, we know there's never going to be transit in that community because it's so far away from everything else. If we are looking at the planned subdivision down by the GO station, we know that in the fullness of time there will be transit there. So I see that as something that I would put in the column of things that we can impact. So I would love to look at this chart and think about what can we impact and what can't we. How much sway do we have with developers to build residential density that we want? How much sway do we have in bringing a doctor's office to Mount Albert? So again, it's about operationalizing these things, and I know that this is a strategic plan, but the devil's in the details. It's what comes next out of this. So I think these are wonderful aspirational things that we absolutely should be aspiring to, but to put too many things on the list that we know we really have no control over sets us up for failure. So I would like the next step to see this list with, here's how we impact that list, and so that we don't get caught in the transit's not up to us. Well, we don't deliver it, but we build the communities that would support it, or not.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, that I was just going to ask if that would be helpful, because I do believe that it's useful to have sort of a universal definition that we're working toward, but what we can do in the sort of the next time we speak is if we agree that these are our attributes that fit and that we want to aspire to, we can put it in the context of what we have the ability as a municipality to influence and have clarity around that. This wasn't necessarily intended to be a to-do list. This is still sort of a high-level theme that influences our thinking, and out of that will fall the sort of staff strategic priorities and actions and tactics. But just on the example of transit, for example, knowing that that's a priority informs how you plan and how you, what partnerships you try to build and when, what services you try to leverage and those types of things, even though we don't directly control it. So. The next slide is another sort of list of sort of aspirational attributes, and I'll give you a moment to sort of review those, and happy to entertain any comment or questions.
Councillor LaHaye, did you have a question?
Yes. Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. In terms of the definition of the use of the word amenities, I've been thinking about that word because I know this is a high-level discussion. However, in the future, I think we might want to be more specific, because I think amenities mean different things to different people, even understanding the word amenities. So clean drinking water could be an amenity depending on where you live, but amenities for other people's means access to a swimming pool, or access to, in terms of a doctor or a tennis court, or whatever the priorities are for that person's life, or another grocery store. So I think we need to define the word amenity and find another word that's more accessible to the general public, even in understanding, because I've used that word in discussions with residents, and people just kind of say that word, amenities, but what are we really talking about when we say amenities? And I would like to suggest that, because amenities somehow implies it's something that we like or we want, but are we talking about basic needs? And again, I would refer back to access to some sort of medical or healthcare center in East Gwillimbury, and specifically in Mount Albert. I would consider that an important necessity.
Councillor Crothers.
I agree, it needs to be defined. I think definitions are so key when it comes down to this stuff, and that would be one of my suggestions, is to take out the pages that have quotes and instead put in definitions, so it's more clear what we mean. And amenities is defined within the Thinking Green standards. It says, which include grocery store, community center, pharmacy, medical, library, coffee shop, hair, bank, daycare, restaurant. So it's all there, and I think that's a great definition of it. And so making sure that we're consistent from one document to the next, I think is important, and I do like the idea of making sure that's defined.
Thank you. That's interesting, because I would suggest that in this context, they're talking about parks and recreation spaces and things like that. And sorry, there's one term that appears there twice for some reason, but so I definitely, we take your point that having clarity around, and I think maybe defining sort of legislated services, and that, access to clean drinking water and safe roads and that sort of thing. And then I'm not even sure what the term would be, but the sort of essential services within a community, so, that support healthcare and education, those types of things. And then the amenities as defined in the Thinking Green standards. So.
I just want to circle back to the comment on transit being safe. That has to do with the access to the transit, not the transit itself. So if you have to, walk across 4-lane road to get to your transit stop, it's not safe. So when we talk about transit, we talk about safety, it's not necessarily about how safe the bus is, but it's the access that has to be safe.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. So the word accessibility, I think, could be added to the document to make it more, and perhaps accessibility to practical necessities, something like that, along those lines.
Through you, Madam Mayor, is council comfortable with the idea of including, this sort of high-level aspirational goal qualified by what the municipality can actually impact, and then sort of defining, it's not necessarily promising that we're going to deliver transit services or that, but that is, thematically, is that kind of where we'd like to go with this document?
I'm seeing nods.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Webster?
Just an observation and listening closely today, Madam Mayor, the one quadrant there that talks about public service facilities is akin, given the conversation on what we directly control and what we can advocate for. And so parks, public spaces, community centers, rec facilities, and libraries we can directly control. But the provision of education, schools, and childcare centers is something that's more of an advocacy role again. So I think that's an important differentiation we have to continue to make as we move forward.
Thank you. Councillor Crothers?
I think it's more than advocacy. We can't control when they build a school, but if we build a community that only has 200 residents in there, 200 students in there, there's never going to be a school there. So I think it's something that we do directly impact in how we plan.
Go ahead.
Thank you. That neighborhood that we keep hounding on about, I feel bad for the people who live there at this point, but the reality is that in the fullness of time, they won't be stranded. They're adjacent to the second concession. There will be hopefully a high school within walking distance and all of the human services that we expect. It's just that it was premature. And that's one of the things that we struggle with across the community is, okay, we're going to build the houses first, and then we have to trust that everything else will fall into place. And that's I think, where our big challenge is that timing and the phasing of the growth, right? And I think that's really what it's come down to, is those people will have lived, those houses will have existed for 10, 15, 20 years before they actually see a complete 15-minute community exist there. So it will happen. It's just a question of when. But the official plan shows it's built up all the way around it.
Next slide, please, Andrew. So the theme of connection was another one that resonated and resounded through all of the conversations. The importance of supporting and facilitating connection to each other, to the environment, and to a sense of place. And I think that it came up in conversations about safety and even traffic calming, for example. The thought was, if you're connected to your neighbors and you know your neighbors, you're less likely to throw trash on their front lawn or speed by if you know kids are living there. So that was something the team felt was really important to capture, that idea of connection and being sort of an overarching theme that threads through everything that we do. Certainly it's very visible in the work that CPRC does in terms of programming. It's very visible in what the library does, but I think there are opportunities to foster connection in all aspects of what the municipality delivers. Just wondered if there were any further thoughts on where that fits and how that informs either the strategic plan itself or our actions.
Councillor LaHaye?
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. So the word connection, I've been thinking about that as well, and I believe when we were just having our one-on-one discussions, I used the word interconnectedness. I think there are different variations of the word connection that might emphasize more, just not connection, but belonging. So I might suggest that we consider using an even stronger word, like interconnectedness or connectedness, not just connection. And I'd be wondering what the other councillors think of that word, because belonging, I think, is a word that's missing perhaps in this document.
I'm not seeing any comments at this time.
Next slide, please. In terms of the language of the plan, what we heard was that that there was a desire to have the language be action-oriented, to be specific, so that we can attach measurable outcomes to that language, but recognizing that this is part of an ongoing process, and one of the thoughts was that we don't need to say continue to provide programming or continue to have a library, that we can pick up where we are and focus on what's important for this term of council. Is that everybody comfortable with that approach, and does that make sense? Thank you. That was easy. Now we'll get into sort of the distillation of the emerging strategic priorities. This is sort of a first cut based on what we heard, and trying to tie it to the prior strategic plan, but also introduce some new elements. So what we've done is, where we had 4 puzzle pieces or 4 strategic pillars or priorities in the previous plan, we've now suggested that, based on the feedback that we've had, that there should be 5, and have defined them as such. So if we can go to the next slide. Responsible growth. And there was some discussion about whether or not building complete communities and responsible growth were the same thing, but I think that there's perhaps enough of a distinction, and we can certainly discuss that here this morning, to separate the two, and that that we want to, in this element, or this strategic priority, the focus is on responsible and balanced growth management, and that ensures paying attention to that concept of sustainability, not just in terms of environmental, economic, but also respecting heritage, and making sure that we can preserve that sense of identity, economic sustainability, the achieving balance through attracting investment in high value jobs, and then advocating for a variety of housing options, so that we are accessible to residents at every stage of life. This is not to suggest this is a complete list, so we can certainly add different objectives within here, or if these don't fit, but I'll open for discussion, obviously, if there's some thoughts on this.
Questions?
Good. Okay.
I'm not seeing any at this time.
Next slide. So build complete communities. We've slightly amended the definition, or to say that we want to support the ability of residents to connect to amenities, services, employment, and each other, bearing in mind the idea that we need to better define amenities, because if our own Thinking Green standard doesn't mention parks, so and yet that's often assumed to be part of what amenities describe, so we need to have clarity there, and maybe it's a different word. But this is more about, I would say responsible growth speaks to probably more about the things that economic development and planning can impact, and the building complete communities is more about supporting how residents access services and interact with each other. the idea of placemaking and revitalization, and the idea of engaging residents to become involved as volunteers and civic engagement, that type of thing, that was captured in the previous plan. So happy to chat about this, or if you think it accurately represents what you'd like to see.
Councillor Roy DiClemente, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I actually don't think you need the second line of that green text. I think you can simply say build complete communities that support the ability of residents to connect, and let the power of that word connect do the work for you. Then you're talking about broadband even, if you do
Yeah.
that, right? Is the internet an amenity? Is it a service? Is it just connect and let all of that kind of flow through it? Thank you.
If there's no further additions, and I think we'll be able, once we have our next workshop, my hope is that we'll be able to sort of overlay these themes and high-level priorities with some of the priorities that staff have developed as part of the budget process. So we'll be able to sort of put more context around what we mean by some of these things. But quality programs and services provide value for tax dollars through delivery of programs and services that support our economic, environmental, and social goals. So that is a little bit of a rewording based on the conversations that we had. The idea that value for tax dollars from a resident's perspective. So, what am I getting for the tax dollars I pay? That's not to suggest that there aren't efforts going on internally, all of our modernization efforts, for example, in terms of being more efficient and more effective, but it's sort of that front-facing perspective of how do residents understand what they perceive to be value. Any comment or thoughts on this priority? Oh, sorry, next slide, please, sorry. Thank you.
Councillor LaHaye, go ahead, please.
Through you, Madam Mayor, thank you. The word communication, I think that there's potential here for an opportunity for it to be used to, for example, support and promote the arts, culture, and heritage of East Gwillimbury, and also support and promote a variety, an increased variety of ways of communicating or efficiently communicating with residents as a way of improving and supporting and promoting other areas.
Through you, Madam Mayor, would that speak to the concept of engagement at sort of a higher level? So maybe communication is a tool of engagement? So, we do touch on the idea of engagement in build complete communities, but it was more from the perspective of volunteerism. So it can potentially live here as well, in that the service that we provide is one that helps or assists residents to become more engaged and to have a better understanding of what we offer and what's available to them. Is that sort of the sense?
Yes, through you, Madam Mayor. On an almost daily basis, when I'm interacting with residents, and I was just speaking with someone yesterday who is not on Facebook, does not participate, for example, in social media, bringing to my attention again that there's a large demographic of seniors, specifically in Mount Albert, that they find that they are falling through the cracks in terms of communicating with the town and understanding the town's strategic plan, for example. So I think the town needs to look at ways to improve their communication with all residents, regardless of whether they're online or on social media. Otherwise, we're neglecting and not communicating as effectively as we could be with certain demographics throughout East Gwillimbury. Thank you.
Councillor Carruthers, go ahead.
I really like the provide value for tax dollars, because I think anyone who has ever knocked on a door at election time at any level of government knows that that's the number one thing that you hear. So I think that it has been implied in what we do, but I think having it right there in bold lettering is important for residents to see. To the communication point, I think we can always strive to do more with communication. I think the last few years, those who don't live online, who prefer the face-to-face, have really suffered. But I don't think that's due to lack of efforts in communication. I think that we're doing a great job given what we were dealing with. I think bringing back more in-person events is going to be key. So I think somehow working communication in here is important, but I don't think it's once we get back to the new normal again, I don't think it's going to be quite as bad as what it's been for the last 3 years for the people who want that face-to-face. I think it's actually going to be better because we now have more options available. But I do think it needs to be worked in here somehow.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'm just going to challenge council, because I would suggest that communication is an output. So what is the outcome that we're trying to achieve? And I've heard you suggest belonging and engagement, and so communication could be a tool to support that, if that is the objective, just trying to get clarity on what the outcome is that we're trying to achieve here.
I think it's about making sure that people know that we're providing value for the tax dollar. So it's about awareness.
Awareness.
So I guess we want people to be aware that they're getting value for their tax dollar. We need people to be aware that there's a new park around the corner. So there's, you can provide the programs and services, but if people aren't aware of them, it doesn't matter. But also, I look at our communication strategy and all the things that we do. The only thing that's really missing is the in-person component, and we haven't been able to do that. And I think once we get that up and running, the open houses were amazing when we were running those. That sort of engagement is important. So I think engagement is part of a word too, part of the language we want to use.
Councillor Hay, go
Through
ahead.
you, Madam Mayor. Yes, it comes down to exactly that. What is the outcome? And I believe the outcome is engagement. That is what we want to encourage. And so, which leads to the question, the very basic question, that the strategic plan that we're all working on. How is the strategic plan going to be communicated to all of the residents of East Gwillimbury when it is completed, so that they are aware of what our mission and what our values are and what the goals are, and that they will hopefully follow through then with becoming more engaged and with increasing the efficiency of communications with the town if they have questions. So that's my big question. How are you going to deliver as a town this strategic plan when it's completed to all residents? Yeah.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, if we can park that question, because I think that it is a big question and it's part of the process. So as part of today's discussion, we'll sort of be able to talk about that a little bit and get your input on what makes sense in terms of a process to ensure that residents are engaged. Okay, and the fifth, where are we? Sorry.
Councillor Jones, go ahead.
Sorry, Madam Mayor, just before we move on, I just wanted to add one more item or comment to that original question there you had about the purpose or the outcome desired through communication. And I think that on the previous slide, when we spoke about connectedness or being connected or interconnected, and again, going back to some of the intangibles, again, garbage being thrown on lawns or speeding through neighborhoods, kind of intangibles. I think that, well, they would be challenging to be able to track from a data perspective based from the driver being communications and calculating that outcome. I do want to just make comment on that before we move to the next item, that I do think there is a value of having the outcome of communication be connectedness, but it's on secondary or tertiary levels that might be more challenging to track. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next slide, please, Andrew. So environmental protection, this is newly broken out from what was embedded in with responsible growth. So very much in draft form, so open to hearing any thoughts or changes. Does it represent what we need to say? Does it need to be stronger?
Councillor Crothers, go ahead, please.
I think it's not a standalone piece. I think it's interconnected to everything else. And I think, we went through that discussion when we hired Chris Ross, that it wouldn't be embedded in CIES, but it's something that touches every department. So I was looking at our graphic from before and thinking about putting environmental responsibility in the middle. So rather than protection, because protection is touched on by responsible growth, but it's about environmental responsibility. I think that when we look at the environment, there's sort of three different roles that we have as a municipality. There's what we do as a municipality, so we buy, we're gradually transitioning our fleet to EV. We use less salt on the road. So these are the things that we're doing. That's one. Then the next thing is how we help our residents with environmental responsibility. So we provide the textile and battery recycling. We provide EV charging stations. We do the litter cleanups. I'm sure there's lots of other things that we help residents with. And then there's what we do in planning, how we plan for a future that protects the environment. So I think the environment, it's not just about protection, it's about how it touches every single department. So when I saw that there was 5, I thought, oh, how are you going to do the graphic on that? But I think environment goes right in the middle, and it's environmental responsibility that I think is almost more important than protection. But I would love to hear from our resident expert on what language we should be using.
Just, if I may, through you, Madam Mayor, just thematically, that was sort of the thought of introducing the concept, a high-level concept of sustainability in balance, in that economic, social, and environmental sustainability threads throughout everything we do, and sort of captures, to your point, now, I'm not to suggest that we have to have this broken out as a separate pillar, but there are some specific strategic tasks that Chris is going to undertake in terms of, developing a strategy, updating the Thinking Green standards, and it will comprise a significant area of focus. So it can, just from that perspective, you could substantiate that it can live as its own priority. That's not to suggest, pardon me, that it still isn't part of that overarching theme, but in the same way that a climate change and strategy, there's still going to be an economic and social component of that as well. So I think those three sustainability elements thread through everything, and maybe that captures what you're saying. I thought I would, I guess, looking for sort of validation, confirmation if this should exist as its own strategic priority or its own. And it doesn't mean that it has to stay that way forever. Maybe it makes sense for this term of council, but it gets revisited.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I absolutely think it needs to be its own. I didn't like that it was lumped in with responsible growth, although there is some overlap. I think that it overlaps with everything. It needs to be its own pillar, but I don't see it on an equal footing with all the other pillars. It sort of underpins everything. And to me, it's about responsibility. So that, to me, speaks to everything we do needs to be environmentally responsible. So yes, I agree it should be its own pillar, but I would love to see more than that.
Councillor Roy DeClemente?
I'm going to take the contrarian view on this and suggest that if it's so fundamental to what we're doing, then it shouldn't be a pillar in the strategic plan. It should be part of the mission or the vision or what have you. And for me, yes, it's important, but there are other things that we also do that are also equally important. For me, I'm satisfied by using the theme of sustainability to address the responsibility that we have to our natural world as well as to the humans in it as well. So I see it as, I'm satisfied, I guess, using sustainability rather than environmental protection. That would be my opinion. Thank you.
Any other thoughts?
Councillor Crone, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, through you. I look at these and I agree with what I see on the screen, although, of course, I always ask, okay, what's missing? And I don't know. But I just throw this out as a suggestion. You know, we do have environmental experts here on staff, but also we might want to seek some comment or feedback from some other of our strategic partners like the Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority, for they're intimately involved with planning and development as well. So I think that might be worth your time just to give them a shout and see what comments they would have. They're probably more used to scribbling this down than we are. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
I would imagine they're asked very often.
Through you, Madam Mayor, just from a totally pragmatic perspective, part of our exercise has been trying to balance the aspirational goals with what the commitments we already have, legislative and otherwise, and then in a way that fits with our business planning process and budgeting process. So there is some benefit to having the consistency and simplicity of being able to tie it to a priority and be able to report on it. For example, the programs and policy development piece, when we get to discussions around the budget and corporate priorities, I'm sure Chris is going to bring forward a number of objectives that she has in terms of the policy development, that kind of thing. So I will confess that it is a little bit of just trying to make everything mesh together, but making sure that it still gets that level of profile that council is comfortable with.
Councillor John?
So I agree with what Councillor Carruthers is saying on underpinning all of the priorities. Also taking another step, like when we think about fiscal responsibility, and when you look at what the strategic plan looks like, there's an argument for saying, well, fiscal responsibility needs to sit in the middle because that touches everything as well. And so I am ignorant to the process on building the strategic plan versus building the business plan versus building key priorities and what that looks like and how that is layered, because I really do believe that environmental, we'll say protection as it is written here, is something that should be underpinning what we're doing. But I also believe that fiscal responsibility needs to be something that's underpinning as well, and we don't even have that on the document. So it is my ignorance of not knowing where to place those two items within this strategic plan that we're talking about today that is preventing me to comment in a better way, but I'm wholly agreeing with Councillor Carruthers on it, but with the friendly addition of fiscal responsibility underpinning as well.
Through you, Madam Mayor, this is where how we arrived at the the idea of the sustainability theme that is traditionally defined as having an economic, social, and environmental component, and trying to capture it. And to your point, fiscal is on the next slide, so we didn't forget it completely. So because I think those three elements need to exist in balance. You can't ignore any one of those and be successful and sustainable as a community. So it's perhaps not perfect, but it's sort of an accepted definition, and that's where we got that, that's how we arrived at that, is that it promotes that idea of, all the elements need to be considered in order for us to be successful, in order for us to be, to have the community that we are working toward, that we, as part of our vision. So I think it's, well, that's my view. I'm the facilitator, but it's what I see reflected in our efforts, that all three of those components are, and depending on the initiative, and depending on what's happening, the circumstances, one may have more priority over the other, but overall, I think it's a useful tool to look at that sustainability model as sort of being our guiding principle. And then to your point about how they're derived, we, in an ideal world, we would have this discussion, and then we would be able to, have the sort of the staff would be able to derive their business plans based on these priorities, and the budget would come from there. But, as you know, we've been working somewhat concurrently, but we do have the opportunity to make sure that they align as we go forward. Part of that is because we do, there's continuity. We didn't stop doing things, in order to do this plan. So we have a continuity of service. We have continuity of legislated services that we have to provide. But I think what this allows us to do is to refocus, reaffirm, and maybe get rid of the things that we shouldn't be doing because they don't align as we go through the process. So that, concurrent to these discussions that we've been having, senior staff have been developing their list of priority objectives, and then we'll be able to hopefully in the next session be able to kind of see how they fit. But
Councillor Crothers, then Councillor Roy DeClemente, then Councillor LaHaye.
Thank you. I think a good point is raised here about the purpose of these pillars is to set objectives that we can measure against. Whether it's a measurable goal or just, yes, we did it, or no, we didn't do it. So, they always say you can't improve what you don't measure. So I think we need to have this on there as a pillar so that we can put goals next to it that we can come back to and check in to make sure that we're measuring it. I think it like fiscal responsibility, environmental responsibility touches everything, and probably some language in there about that it's not a standalone pillar, but it does affect everything. But then the same could be said for municipal excellence, right? That should affect everything as well. There's nothing that we do that isn't about municipal excellence. So I think that's why the puzzle pieces are such a great graphic for this, because everything is interconnected. So I hope we'll stick with that, because I think that visually that demonstrates more than even what the words say, but the interconnectedness of all this.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you. I was reminded of a somewhat old-fashioned word, and that's the word steward. And while we're not necessarily environmental protectors, we are stewards of the environment, and we are stewards of the public purse. Again, old-fashioned language, but it echoed for me some of the language that's in our Indigenous land acknowledgement. That there are protectors and caregivers, and I think that maybe that's the theme that we're trying to get at, is that we're shepherding and caring for rather than protecting as things start to change. Thanks.
Councillor LaHaye.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. In terms of the visual representation of everything that we're talking about and how it's going to be presented to not only counselors and the staff, but all of the residents in terms of understanding, and the visual tools are very powerful. I appreciated very much and understood the concepts from your Venn diagram, and your Venn diagram had sustainability and resilience and environment. And I felt that looking at that Venn diagram, with the environment being one of those three components, that it very much not only overlapped, but formed part of the core of everything that we're discussing. So I find, in terms of how it's kind of contradictory, how we're going to present visually, ultimately, our strategic plan, whether it's going to be puzzle pieces or whether it's going to be a Venn diagram. I felt that visually the Venn diagram was very impactful in terms of incorporating the priority of environment and environmental preservation and stewardship throughout everything. I felt that that was a more effective visual tool rather than puzzle pieces. And then we would have to have a specific pillar just for the environment because it's already incorporated in that Venn diagram.
If I through you, Madam Mayor, it could be both, perhaps, and we can. I'm not a graphic designer, but I think if we think of it sort of in the hierarchy of overarching, what are the themes? What are those themes that are present through everything that we do, and then the puzzle pieces, or maybe it's now a circular interlocking puzzle to have the 5 components and how they all that just suggests the element of interconnectedness. But certainly I take your point about the importance of being able to or the value of strong visual representation to be able to succinctly get the message across, and I will hopefully be able to have some experts help me with that.
I'm sure you already know who they are.
If we go to the next slide, please.
Just one
sorry.
more question.
Oh, sorry.
Councillor Crone, please.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. I just, Councillor Roy DeClemente brought up a good point about the land acknowledgement and the language that we use there and stewards. And I'm just wondering, is there, as we look towards truth and reconciliation, is there an opportunity to embed more of that into this strategic plan? I just throw that out there for consideration.
I've made a note to through you, Madam Mayor, to touch on that when we talk about values, and because it may intersect there, but
Great.
But we will,
Yeah,
because that did come out of the individual conversations, that it needs to be more than just speaking the words, and how do we start living what we're saying. So
Absolutely. Thank you.
Next slide, please. So the 5th puzzle piece or pillar, the culture of municipal excellence. I don't believe this has changed much from the prior iteration, other than changing the language to be more action-oriented and more aspirational, rather than, foster, try to, we're suggesting be an accessible, welcoming community that actively supports equity, diversity, and inclusion. So, rather than sort of placing it at a distance, that's what we want to be, that's what we want to live. So. And the fiscal responsibility piece is there, that responsibility and value for tax dollar is a key component.
Go ahead, please.
If I could, and I acknowledge that. However, to Councillor Carruthers, actually, no, it's a little bit deeper. There is not, again, it's my ignorance on the way that we're laying out and marketing this, but it really should be fiscal responsibility. That's a bullet point on a slide under culture, and really is that underpinning just as the environment stewardship underpinning as well. And I think that's what I'm trying to get at. But again, it's my ignorance of how we are executing on this from a strategic plan, business plan, key priorities, and really, I think, to Councillor Leahy's point about what that looks like and how we're communicating it.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I think there's There's discussion to be had. It is a tactic, though, because in terms of the overarching theme of economic sustainability, you can be fiscally responsible as an organization, but if you're not attracting new investment and new corporate, expanding your corporate tax base, you're going to have a negative impact on your residents. So this is where I think probably when we start talking about priority setting, because these are not in any order, and some of these may need to be at the top of the list or appear in bold because of where they, where council views them to be as priorities. But I'm not sure fiscal priority is the only aspect of economic sustainability, not in the context as it was defined previously. So.
Councillor Crone?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to Ms. Bejean. This particular slide really speaks to a favorite topic of mine about organizational health. And in my previous career, I used to rant on about it, and I think I've carried it on here since I first, yeah, see nodding heads, yeah, I apologize. There's three good measures of organizational health. That's cash flow, that's employee or staff engagement, and then customer engagement. So I think we could do a really good job of measuring what our cash flow, we have positive cash flow, and that's important. The other two areas, I think, are opportunity areas for us to improve on the measurement, on the staff engagement side and on the resident side to measure their satisfaction level with us as well. So love that this is here, and I think we've got some opportunities, but we need to measure the staff engagement. And I know we're doing a bit of that, but we need to shift more to the resident engagement too, to see what we're doing well and where we need to improve. But that's the end of my rant. I apologize for bringing it up again. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Councillor Roy DeClemente, go ahead.
Thank you. I think it comes back to the idea of where our priorities are and ranking these, because if we talk about fiscal responsibility and environmental stewardship, where do we draw the line? So if we say, well, if the environment trumps fiscal responsibility and we're just going to spend on, we're going to force everybody to have electric vehicles, and we're all going to, we're going to go to the extreme. We had that discussion when we were working on the Health and Active Living Plaza and saying, okay, at what point are we being both environmentally responsible and fiscally prudent, and trying to strike a balance between those things rather than a hierarchy of what's important and what's not.
Through you, Madam Mayor, would it be helpful, we had some conversations in the interviews about the lenses through which we evaluate the reports that are written, and right now they just sort of have the high-level puzzle pieces that may be too high level to be meaningful. But in terms of achieving the balance, if you're, and the balance I would suggest will shift depending on the situation, but if we're committed to at least, understanding the impact from an environmental perspective, from a social perspective, and from a fiscal perspective or economic perspective, and then the recommendation coming from consideration of those three, I think that supports that idea of balance, and it's going to differ with every situation, but it would be difficult to sort of prescribe that it's going to be 70% this and 30% that, but just continue. I think it's more of what we were sort of envisioning when we talked about that concept of sustainability as, and aspirational goal of achieving balance is that it's an ongoing conversation, it's an ongoing evaluation that always considers all three, so that things don't come up that, great idea, but destroys the planet, or that type of thing.
Thank you. I think that's helpful.
Okay. I'm conscious of time. If, Madam Mayor, do we need to take a break? Are we okay to continue?
I'm not seeing anybody that's jumping up, so we'll continue along.
Perfect,
Thank you.
Okay, next slide, please. So now we're going to change tact a little bit and sort of the validating the vision and core purpose or mission. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Before we change and go on to changing tactics, I just wanted to, if possible, without disrupting the flow too much, go back to page 9 of 26, where it has that Venn diagram of economic and community and social and environmental resilience. The language regarding recovery, I've been thinking about that as we've been discussing these other slides, and it talks about withstanding disaster and fostering community recovery. Is it possible to incorporate part of the definition of one of the other values of the town of optimism and put it in a more positive wording, which would be seeking opportunities in the face of adversity rather than withstanding disaster and community recovery? That word recovery still isn't quite gelling with me in terms of my understanding of it in the context of resilience. So I was just thinking of incorporating some language that we already use in our values statements about opportunities in the face of adversity.
Thank you for your suggestion.
Okay, so in terms of the vision, we do have time, but it may not be an effective use of time to go too far into wordsmithing, but just we wanted to sort of suggest, based on the feedback that we received, update to the vision statement. Is this hitting the right notes? Does this capture the tone that you're looking for? Are there words missing? And I don't think we necessarily have to land on the perfect version today, but if this is close or if it's way off, it would be helpful to know and be able to kind of work with that.
I'm sensing that it's close. I think there are opportunities for wordsmithing. Obviously, you're going to come back to us with a finished product, with the anticipation that council will have another look. And sometimes we will see it today, other times we won't see it, and we'll look at it in the final copy and think, how did I miss that? So we have opportunities still in front of us before we
Certainly.
conclude, so I think we're fine.
I did want to note the word welcoming. It's not something that we've traditionally used, but it does feature in other municipalities. It's a key focus, and certainly the work that we're doing on equity, diversity, and inclusion might speak to welcoming. The word belonging was mentioned, so just want to validate that that's sort of the right theme and direction where we'd like to go. Okay, perfect.
Councillor Crothers, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think it hits the right notes. I think we could find other words that would hit slightly different notes, but I think this is very good. It's aspirational without being ridiculously aspirational. We're not creating a utopia, so I think it hits a good balance, and I appreciate the work that went into this.
Thank you. Okay, thanks. So the next slide, please. Core purpose, which functions effectively as our mission statement. And this was, we heard quite consistently the idea of delivering on value for tax dollars, keeping it simple, and not to go too far into tactics, but the concept that every employee would be able to recite this and understand this is why we're here. This is what do you do? We deliver value for tax dollars, providing quality services that residents want and need. So if that captures it, great. If there's any tweaking, that's what we're here for, so.
Go ahead, please.
Wasn't really sure where to make this comment, but I'll take the time to make the comment now. I think that, going through this exercise on the strategic plan and then coming with the vision statement and the core purpose and whatnot, and you just brought the comment forward about being able to recite it. I think that the extension of that or prior to that is that as we have gone through this exercise, taking the team's resources, our time and energy in the direction of the community just asked us to act on their behalf, are we living this? And I think that, I've made a couple notes from this presentation about, there was a comment about we've been executing on parks, and that's something that we've been championing, but for some reason it wasn't in there about what we were doing. I mean, we spoke about stranded communities, and there was a comment about the Minto community, and I think that, if we are actually, from the perspective of vision and core purpose, if we're actually living it, would allocation have been given if we are living it now that it's documented and everybody's behind it? And I think that while we are not going to obviously be able to answer all of these questions or comments that I'm throwing out there today, I think that it's important that from a go-forward perspective, that are we actually living and breathing this? If we are invested in doing this properly, we need to make sure that we're living and breathing it. So thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
If I may, Madam Mayor, do you have any thoughts on what and how we would embody that? Like, what's an example or that would demonstrate that we're living it?
So, you may not have wanted to ask me that question, but I think that, when you knock on somebody's door and you ask them about what delivering value for tax dollars is, I think that, we're working very hard to make help happen. But in a comparative scenario where residents are coming and we are welcoming, I'll use that word, into the community of Canada's fastest growing municipality, I don't think that very many new residents are necessarily feeling like there's a welcome basket on their door. And I don't think that they would say that we are living what value for tax dollars are to new residents. I think that, older East Gwillimbury was very much a bedroom community, and we were living off the services of other municipalities, and I support or buttressed by other municipalities. I shouldn't say living off services. I should say buttressed by other municipalities. And so, from a tangible perspective, we got a whole heck of a lot of work to do to start to deliver everything from, the pool and help. And that I think that very much help is a metaphor, you could say personifies what we need to do as a community, but also on a smaller scale all across in every single smaller community within East Gwillimbury. We could talk about comms. I don't know if that's the appropriate time either, but I think that, real tangible things, we have the opportunity, like how does Loblaws benefit our community? I think we celebrate the development that's happening on Woodbine from the perspective of jobs and development charges. And me personally, it's about the ongoing diversified tax base that helps to add us being economically sustainable. But I also think that we need to be standing in front of what is, how are we benefiting these existing residents? And that's everything from we're going to have a pipe that's going to go down Mount Albert Side Road, and then we're going to have the opportunity to connect our sports complex, and that's going to be able to free up some land, and then we'll be able to deliver mixed-use residential, and then we're going to be able to get residents hooked up. And I think that, how can we live our core purpose? I think we need to attempt to communicate in a more stronger, tangible way that is iterative to what we are doing right now. As again, I think that our delivery on communications is very much there and solid, but go back and knock on that person's door, like, deliver value for tax dollar, I think that we've got a lot of work to do. And I think that born and raised in East Gwillimbury, and I'm proud and I love our town, but I just think that we need to continue to be champions of what better looks like, because if we all are proud to be living here, I think we should be celebrating the work that we're doing to be able to to ensure that every resident should be able to say, I love East Gwillimbury because of. And I don't know that we're able to do that right now today, so.
Councillor Crothers, go ahead, please.
Some really great points there. I go back to what we talked about with the pillars, that it's about what we're measuring, is what we're improving. So I think to answer your question about what does this look like to say that we've done this, I think every staff report needs to be very clear in answering this question. How does this report deliver value for taxpayers while providing quality service to residents? I think that every every decision that we're making here, we need to be able to walk away from this table saying, yes, what we decided today will deliver value, will provide quality services. So I think that's how we do it. I think it's in the reporting, not just putting the puzzle pieces at the end of the report, but actually being able to answer the question, did this deliver value and provide quality programs?
Go ahead, please.
I think that, I guess where I struggle is what does value for tax dollars mean? When I knock on doors and I say, we have the lowest relative taxes in all of York Region, some people are, yeah, that's great, thank you. Others are like, well, why aren't you spending more on this? Or why aren't you spending more on that? So people will say, I don't mind if you raise my taxes as long as you give me a pool. Or people will say, I want you to lower my taxes because you're spending too much on fancy trucks. So I think that value for tax dollars it has a different meaning for different people. And the identity, so to come back to the sort of, are we a welcoming community? A lot of the people who have moved here because of something. And in many, I did hear actually from someone that they moved here because our taxes were low. They moved out of a condo. They literally said that, and I'd never heard that before. I champion it, I talk about it all the time, but somebody actually had done the work and said, I moved here because the taxes were lower and I can get more for my money than in a condo. But most people say I moved here because of the green space, the trails, the parks, the quality of life. And that value, I think, is something that we need to try and enshrine here, is to say, we're about this, and that's why people move here.
Go ahead.
Madam Mayor, just in follow-up to Councillor Roy DiClementi's comment and question of what does value for tax dollars mean, and I think that what I was attempting to get at was on the comms exercise. We pay our Rogers bill or Bell bill every month, and we know that when we pay that bill, we have received this tangible service, i.e. with our phone or on our TV and our internet. And I think that, from a value for dollars perspective of a property tax bill, and again, if you pay it monthly or however you choose to pay, but let's say that you're paying it monthly, and then recognizing that it's not just the municipal services that we're providing, but there's also regional and educational taxes that are coming out of that monthly fee. The fact is that, again, through our comms exercise, being able to celebrate the tangibles and why people have moved here, to Councillor Roy DiClementi's comments about the trails, the green space, but, clearing our roads and garbage pickup and help. And, if that was tangible as you were paying your Bell or Rogers bill, I think that people would be like, wow. And I think that there's an opportunity to really, on our core purpose, rally around what defining value for tax dollars actually is.
Councillor Roy DeClemente.
Just briefly, Mr. Valchich used to do an exercise when we did our water bill, and he would compare the price of a liter of water to other liquids, to milk, to gasoline, and I think that maybe that's part of it, is, okay, I'm paying this bill, and what am I getting in return? And many people, you know, sort of, well, I don't use any of those municipal services. Oh, you don't drink water? You don't have a fire truck come to your door if you call 911? Like, you know, I think we need to do a better job, again, of communicating what services we deliver and what you're getting for that dollar. Thanks.
Councillor Crone.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think this, you know, the point was made earlier that the value for tax dollars is probably subjective depending on who you are, and you know, and so but I think this can be much more simpler than all of that. For me, when I look at this, this is something that everyone on this side of the table should be considering when we're voting on something or debating something. But also I think it's instructional for staff when you're working on something. And if you're not sure about it, simply ask yourself that question: how does this, you know, provide quality services the residents want and need? And I think that in itself can be just a great little tool for staff to use, because sometimes we do get caught up in things and do things that provide zero value to just about everyone. So as government, we need to be better at that, and we need to admit it and ask the simple questions. But this, to me, this is a great question, and it's a great line to throw out there for the public. All right. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you.
So through you, Madam Mayor, what I'm hearing is that there's utility in it being sort of a check for staff and for elected officials, but there's also some tactics that will roll out of that in terms of how we demonstrate it. So it kind of, it's useful on two fronts, I guess. That's what I'm, thank you. Okay, next slide, please. So I wanted to speak to the attributes and the you know, they appear in the former strategic plan as sort of the core values. And I also wanted to, at this point, to sort of circle back to that question about the truth and reconciliation and it being a key focus, and that we need to somehow live, and that we're living what we say in the land acknowledgement. And just sort of wanted to pose the question, like, I guess, how are we held accountable to these attributes? How do we use them? What's their role in the strategic plan? Madam Mayor, we had a conversation, and it's the idea of that's sort of what do we stand for, and if you think of it in terms of what's that point at which we will not accept certain behaviors or that kind of thing. So it's just trying to get a sense of where council feels that these where they fit in the strategic plan, or do they fit in the strategic plan, or how do we capture them, and how do we ensure that these concepts are enshrined in what we do?
Councillor Carruthers?
Thank you. These are not values, and they were never established as values. These are character attributes, and they were just developed as character attributes for individuals, things that we need to think about as we're doing our job, staff as they're doing their job. So I don't think they speak to our organization as a whole. It's more of a personal thing. I also think that they're dated, that we've been on this journey as a region for more than 10 years, I think. And I think that we've now moved more towards truth and reconciliation, and using the space in the plan to talk more about how we're living our land acknowledgement rather than the character attributes. I like that we still have the flags up, and I think we should still have them up, and I think it's things that we should think about as individuals. I'm just not sure it has a place in our strategic plan anymore. It's time to move on to everything. We can't include everything in the plan, I guess is what I'm saying. So maybe that space is better used for something that's more current.
Councillor LaHaye?
Through you, Madam Mayor, thank you. the reason I am here on town council is to represent the community. And the qualities that I was elected on, I believe, are the values of the characteristics here laid out that are fundamental to who we are as leaders on town council and should inform every decision we make and every decision that the town makes. So I believe very strongly that they should continue to be included. Thank you.
I'm sure we'll have more discussion about this one. However, I will suggest that we park this one for a future meeting and continue to move along today.
Thank you. So, final slide. Just want to talk about next steps, and I had made a note to sort of come back to the questions around communication and engagement with the strategy. So in terms of our next steps in building the plan, the team will work to incorporate the feedback that you've provided. As I suggested, if it makes sense to council, we'll start to try to pull in some of the priorities that have been identified by staff and work to sort of fit them in within the priorities that have been identified, just to sort of get that alignment. And then we can have a discussion around priority setting, what's most important, what do we need to really focus on. And then with that information, staff can go back and start developing some high-level performance indicators that will give you so it's not just measuring outputs, like I had 6 meetings, it's measuring the outputs that are moving the needle towards the outcome that we're trying to achieve, and be able to define what those are and be able to report on those on a regular basis. We do, this is not new. We do this on an ongoing basis, but it's part of the process. And as from what we've heard today, there may be some new metrics that need to be incorporated into how we report. And then in terms of engaging with the strategy, once we have a draft strategy, and we certainly don't need to wait, we can certainly reach out to key stakeholders, as it was suggested with respect to the environmental pillar, for example. But the thought was that we would engage our key partners. It could be committees of council and, folks like the LSRCA, Chamber of Commerce, and invite their feedback on the draft strategy. And then the same thing, public outreach, that we've got a draft strategy that's available for the public to review and comment on and solicit their feedback through I'll obviously lean on Mita's expertise in terms of how we create awareness about the opportunity to provide some input and feedback. Again, this is a very, high level plan, but I think it's worthwhile to be able to go out to the residents and business community and ensure that have we hit the right notes? Is there anything missing? Does this make sense? And then bring that feedback back for hopefully the creation and adoption of a final strategy. So, happy to entertain any questions about the process or anything that we've discussed so far today.
How would you like the members of council to be in touch with you, having spent the morning talking about this? Inevitably, there will be an aha moment for someone between now and the next time we plan for another meeting. How would you like council members to engage with you at that point?
Through you, Madam Mayor, given the short turnaround time, and we have another meeting scheduled for a week from today, we'd be more than happy to schedule conversations if that's the wish. But if you phone call or email to the team works as well. So it's really it's at your discretion, whatever works best for you. It may be more convenient to be able to reflect and craft an email or just pick up the phone, or we can schedule another round of one-on-one meetings if that's the preference. Sort of leave it to what, no.
I was
As a no.
thinking more that, within the next 48 hours, you kind of have another look at it, and you start to make some comments that perhaps have not been discussed here today, and not wanting to lose that information. So I was thinking more of something within a shorter period of
Sure.
time. There may be something that needs to go back, and everybody is a part of that discussion, but even the short ones for now.
Well, yeah, and I think procedurally, we can sort of collect that. If it's a point of clarity, or if it's a question or something that needs more emphasis, we can collect that and bring it back to the next public session of council for discussion and any decisions that might be made in terms of how that impacts the plan. So.
Mr. Webster?
Madam Mayor, I also offer my services to listen or discuss with members of council as well, sometimes another set of ears. And I do have some considerable background on the prior strategic plans. I know this one's looking forward, but if anybody wants some of the discussion of how we got there. Mr. Velchich is as well. He's been with the organization for quite a while. So both of us, if a member of council wants to discuss some of the elements and complete community and stuff, I would be more than willing to listen as well, and we'll share that with Margot and her team.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? I'm not seeing any. We have completed.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time this morning, and thank you to the facilitation team for the input. And certainly, like I said, if there's any thoughts or comments, if you want to follow up via email to the facilitation team, we'll reflect those in the next workshop plan for a week from today. Do we want to talk about the logistics for the workshop? Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Go ahead.
So, Madam Mayor, being mindful, it's the week prior to the holidays, and we're probably one of the few councils that will be meeting that week, but it's going to have the strategic plan session as one. We do have one item for the public council session, and it's an update, a timely update from Woodbine 1 and the Loblaws development. They would like to spend about 15 minutes with council just to outline the progress on site, some of the infrastructure matters that are occurring, and they wanted to make sure that in full public transparency, there's a full update. So that's planned as the only item on council, plus the special council workshop session for further strategic plan discussion.
Thank you. Questions? Go ahead.
Will we be discussing committees, advisory committees and working groups, and which committees we want to see continue and which ones we're going to, or ones that we might suggest for new committees and so on? Would that be something that we could do at that time?
I think I have an answer, but I'll check and see if my answer is the same as yours. Go ahead, please. We're going to be dealing with it the first part of January. Get that one all put to bed.
The reason I ask is as part of this process, I'm assuming that members of council will have suggestions for new committees and working groups and so on. At that point, we will have been 2 months into our mandate without our marching orders. And I know that our committees are, I don't know if you're getting messages, but I'm certainly getting messages, Madam Mayor, of, are you our liaison? We're preparing a budget. We're going to be presenting to council. Who's our liaison and who's going to be our advocate? And that, I think, is, I'm just trying to respond to a need that I'm perceiving.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I don't believe we have anything else at this time. Could I ask Councillor Johnson, Councillor Crothers to move item number 1, be it resolved that Council's Strategic Planning Workshop presentation dated December 13th, 2022 be received? All those in favor? And that's carried. Item F is our confirming bylaw. I would ask Councillor Cronin, excuse me, Councillor Cronin and Councillor Roy DeClemente To move and second this, be it resolved that bylaw 2022-100, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the special meeting of municipal council held on December 13th, 2022, be taken as read and acted and signed by the mayor and municipal clerk. All those in favor? That is carried. And an adjournment, be it resolved that the special meeting of municipal council adjourn at 12 o'clock exactly. Moved by Councillor Foster, seconded by Councillor Hay. All those in favor? And that's carried. And with that, we will adjourn. Thank you very much.